Charleston and Berkeley County voters will choose a solicitor who is considered the chief prosecuting attorney for the Ninth Circuit. We encourage voters to go to the League of Women Voters vote411.org website. It's considered the chief prosecuting attorney for the Ninth Circuit. To view this information, voters keep checking back on vote411.org as candidate forums are added throughout the election season. We will proceed this way in alphabetical order tonight, and they will be done as their names appear on the ballot. David Osborne and Scarlett A. Wilson. The format is such that candidates will respond to questions in rotating alphabetical order by the last name. For example, the candidate's opening statement will be David Osborne first and then Scarlett Wilson. No questions will be asked by me that are directed at only one candidate or are of a personal nature. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to make an opening and closing statement. Candidates will have 90 seconds to respond to the questions. A candidate may take an additional 60 seconds for rebuttal after the other candidate has responded. As a reminder, a rebuttal is an opposing argument or a contradiction to what an opposing candidate has said. If you wish to make a rebuttal, please signal us by raising your hand. But remember, you are only allowed one rebuttal per candidate question. All right, let's begin. Opening statements, Mr. Osborne, you go first alphabetically, and you have 60 seconds.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you, League of Women Voters, for putting this on. I really appreciate it. My name is David Osborne, and I want to be your next Ninth Circuit solicitor. I was born in Charleston. I lived in the Liberty Homes housing projects in North Charleston until I was 6. We then moved out to Summerville, where I graduated from Summerville High School. Became the first person on either side of my family to go to college. And after I graduated from the University of South Carolina, we moved to New Orleans. I was a New Orleans police officer for 5 years. If you've ever been, you know New Orleans is a fun town, but when you get a couple kids, it's time to come back home. So I became a Charleston police officer, worked there for 11 years. And while I was a detective sergeant of the violent crimes unit during the day, I went to the Charleston School of Law part-time, nighttime program and got my law degree. I was a prosecutor for 10 years. I did 7 years in the Ninth Circuit and 3 years in the First Circuit. Bottom line, I've been fighting violent crime for over 25 years. And now I'm ready to fight for you.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Ms. Wilson, 60 seconds for your opening statement.
Thank you so much. I'm Scarlett Wilson. I'm the Chief Prosecutor for Charleston and Berkeley counties, and I too want to thank the League for having this forum. I've led our community through some pretty dark times. I've been in the glare of the international spotlight, from the murder of Walter Scott to the massacre at Mother Emanuel to the riots on King Street, and then a worldwide pandemic. I've been trusted, and I've been tested, and I've been tough. And tonight you'll learn more about the great work of our office and of my team, of whom I could not be more proud. We've had the most adverse circumstances of any solicitor's office in this state. And despite those circumstances, we've done a miraculous job of keeping the community safe. We're on the cutting edge of prosecution, and the independent, real data, it shows that our hard work is paying off. We're at the top of the list for violent offenders serving serious time in the Department of Corrections. You'll hear that while I fought to keep you safe with bond reform and judicial reform, that my opponents locked on with those who have fought against it tooth and nail.
Okay, thank you.
I look forward to sharing more with you through the night.
Ms. Wilson, your time is up. Thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off. Your time was up. I know that you're participating, and that takes a lot of efforts and energy, but if you could casually, as you are answering the question, keep your eye on Jerry Cabot, who is going to show the 30-second signal and then the stop signal. That would be helpful.
Is
Thank you
there
so
any way, I'm sorry, is there any way to remove all the other people? I've got a million people showing on my screen. I don't know if David does or not.
Hi, Ms. Wilson. If you go to your view,
Mm-hmm.
there should be an option for showing only video participants, and we're trying to make sure we cut off the videos of anyone who's not a participant.
It'll be fine. I'll try to do better with the time.
That's okay. Thank you very much. So we're going to start with the first question with you, Ms. Wilson. And basically, why is it that you want to represent the citizens of Charleston County as your solicitor?
Well, thank you. I want to continue the good work that we've been doing. I was a state prosecutor in Richland County and then a federal prosecutor for about 6 years. And while that was rewarding and I enjoyed that, I really enjoyed working with victims, working with violent crimes. I found that to be the most rewarding. And we've got a lot of good work left to do. We've had some good successes in our office and statewide with legislation. But there's more to do. When I left the U.S. Attorney's Office to come back to state prosecution, one of the first murder cases I had, the defendant was out on 17 bonds. 17. I set out to remedy that within our office, and many of our office policies that I enacted became enacted into law just recently. Those things are going to have a marked difference and a marked effect on our community and will help keep us safe. I want to continue that good work and to continue working on judicial reform. It is a problem here, not only in the Ninth Circuit, but in our state. We have people who are self-dealing, who are allowing corruption to undermine the confidence of our community. And I want to change that. And we can do that with the gravitas of our office.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Osborne, the same question. Basically, why do you want to represent the citizens of Charleston and Berkeley County as the solicitor?
I am running for Ninth Circuit Solicitor because this is my hometown and I don't like what I see. I do not believe the current solicitor is doing her part to keep our families and communities safe from violent crime. To illustrate that, in the last 2 to 3 years while I was prosecuting in the First Circuit, that's right next door in Dorchester, Calhoun, and Orangeburg County, I alone tried 23 murder warrants. That's 10 trials to guilty verdict. During that same time period, the entire Ninth Circuit, with almost 60 prosecutors, having almost 300 murder warrants pending, with over 50 trial terms to start getting after and trying some of these murderers and these violent criminals, tried a grand total of 5. I have gone back and I've looked at the history of the Ninth Circuit, and I cannot find a time in which the Ninth Circuit, with all of those resources and all of those prosecutors and all of those opportunities, have tried less murder warrants to conviction. That's not keeping our community safe. It's sending the wrong message to the bad guys. And quite honestly, it's not fair to defendants or victims who end up waiting years for their day in court and for their justice. I'm running so I can get in there, stay in the fight for law enforcement and victims, and help keep our community safe in a fair and a just way.
Would like to respond to that.
Yes, you have 60 seconds for rebuttal.
You know, unfortunately, Mr. Osborne has moved from prosecutor to politician rather quickly and has taken statistics totally out of context. He's also left you without the knowledge that since 2012, we haven't been in control of the docket. The judges were in control of the docket. And in the Ninth Circuit, while that was supposedly true across the state, in the Ninth Circuit, we had a special order that limited my ability to docket cases. Then we had the pandemic, and we were closed longer than any circuit in the state. But the good news is, somehow, some way, we have been able to send more violent criminals to prison than most of the circuits out there. We've worked hard despite an uphill battle with cut court time, limits on how many cases we could docket. We've been able to put people in prison who belong there.
Mr. Osborne, I you want a 60-second rebuttal?
I do.
Okay.
All right. So every circuit in the state operated under the same order. And if the idea is that we weren't able to try murders prior to July of 2023, when the new docket came out and gave almost sole control to the solicitors, if that were true, then you would expect come July of 2023 that the Ninth Circuit would have been trying murder after murder after murder. July of 2023, for the next 9 months, you do not see the Ninth Circuit successfully trying a single murder case. They don't successfully try a single murder case until the end of March. And from March until now, you see the Ninth Circuit has tried, I think it's 8 murders. What happened at the end of March? I was running. And I pay attention to murders. I'm a violent crime detective. That's what changed. If the order was the real problem, back in July, from July until March, they would have been trying murders, but they weren't.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. We'll go to the next question, please. In that same vein, Mr. Osborne, what separates you from your opponent?
Well, my focus on violent crime is a big one. I am uniquely qualified for this position. You know, I've worn a uniform. I've enforced the law in some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in our country, like other law enforcement officers. But I've also put on a uniform, and I have successfully gone toe-to-toe with some of the best defense attorneys around in a courtroom. The clear difference between her and I is how we treat murderers and violent criminals. My opponent has said that trying cases is risky. You can't trust a jury, you can't trust a judge, you can't trust an appellate court or a Supreme Court. And as a result, we are seeing an abnormally high number of murders that are being pled down. And that is the main difference. I will stand to fight. I will stand to fight for victims. When you look at the Ninth Circuit under its current leadership, when the police provide to them enough evidence to prove a murderer's guilt, they're only getting a murder conviction 25% of the time. Put another way, 75% of the time, if you commit a murder and it's proven that you did it, you're getting a plea deal. My numbers in the First Circuit, I extended a plea deal 15% of the time. 85% of the time, when I got a murder on my desk and I could prove it, they were found accountable for a murder.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Ms. Wilson, the same question. What separates you from your opponent? You're muted. You're muted. Shayna, can you unmute her?
I got it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
One of the main things that separates me from Mr. Osborne is my commitment to fighting corruption. When Mr. Osborne first began running for solicitor, he immediately jumped on the bandwagon with those who lined their pockets with corruption. And he has joined forces with those who have fought judicial reform, for those who have fought bail bond reform. And it's really rich for him to talk about the dismissal rates when in the First Circuit, he dismissed 67% of all of his cases. 67%. Think about that. And the same is true as when you look at his stats for armed robberies and for murders. We're talking 76% reduced or dismissed, 83% reduced or dismissed. And I don't say that to say that he's light on crime. I say that to show you that he's a hypocrite, because he has this philosophy of what's good for me is not good for thee. We prosecute the cases that we have strong enough evidence to prosecute. We send people to prison and minimize the risk as best we can. If we can get a conviction for someone for 30, 40, 50, 60 years on a guilty plea, we're going to take that guilty plea.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Osborne, you have a 60-second rebuttal.
Okay. So I assume what she's talking about with aligning myself with corrupt individuals, which she said before, is I received a donation from Representative Todd Rutherford and a donation from Leon Stavronakis. Like I've said many times before, I know Leon. I do. I don't think Leon's corrupt. I know I don't know Todd Rutherford. I spoke to Todd Rutherford one time on the phone. Each of them donated to me, I think, $1,000 each. If a donation can corrupt you, my opponent has received over $500,000 worth of donations from defense attorneys. Secondly, the dismissal rate of 67% is just inaccurate. If you go back and you look, it's actually just over or just under 60%. What you're not taking into account is the defendants who died. I can't prosecute them when they die. And lastly, and nextly, what you're not taking into account is I think it was like 14 individuals I convicted for murder. There would be no point to prosecute lesser crimes after they're doing life.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, you have 60 seconds. Mm-hmm.
The reason I use the stats that I use is because he's not giving that benefit to me in my office either. He's not going through and taking out cases that have insufficient evidence, that had duplicate charges, that had deceased defendants, and throwing out these raw numbers. And so rather than play the statistics game, look at the Department of Corrections. Look who's in the Department of Corrections and who's sending them there. Our circuit is sending violent criminals to prison where they belong. And we will continue to do that. To play the statistics game and to act like he does not dismiss cases or he doesn't make plea deals is absolutely absurd and hypocritical. And that's the kind of thing that the Ninth Circuit can't afford in a prosecutor, much less the chief prosecutor, the solicitor.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. We'll start the next question with you. Ms. Wilson, how do you work effectively with local law enforcement?
Well, fortunately, I have a great relationship with local law enforcement, and I've been endorsed by Sheriff Lewis, who is the sheriff for Berkeley County. One of the ways that we work with them is because they come to us for training. And we offer training to law enforcement so that we can help work with them to build stronger cases. That's the end game here. We set up a screening unit in Charleston County so that we could give feedback to law enforcement, trends we were seeing, problems that we were seeing with evidence so that they can improve in making their cases. Our office is divided into teams, and the teams are paired loosely, but with law enforcement so that they can build a rapport and know who they're working with. So in other words, a team of prosecutors is matched with, say, CPD or North Charleston. They get to know those investigators. They get to know those detectives so that they can work well together and establish that rapport. I want to continue that and continue working with the chiefs and the sheriffs so that we can work with the legislature to get laws passed that benefit our community, that we can, like we did with bond reform. That was a full-throated effort by me and all of the sheriffs, the chiefs of police, the mayors, so that we can make our community safer. We were having to stop. I see the note for me to stop. Maybe I'll pick it up on the rebuttal.
Certainly. Ms. Wilson, thank you. Mr. Osborne, the same question to you. How do you work effectively with local law enforcement?
So this brings up a point that it's one of the main reasons that actually encouraged me to go to law school. I was tired of giving good cases to prosecutors and then have them tell me that they're going to have to plead it down, that I have to plead it down. I mean, I didn't mind so much, and I don't think law enforcement minds so much when they have to dismiss a case. I mean, you make an arrest based on probable cause, but maybe it's not beyond a reasonable doubt, so you have to dismiss it. That didn't bother me. But the incessant plea deals for violent criminals is part of what encouraged me to go to law school. You want to have a good relationship with law enforcement, stay in the fight. I got a phone call just this morning from a law enforcement officer who was telling me about Roger Smalls, the individual who was just arrested today for murdering 2 women, or at least he's been accused of murdering 2 women. He was charged with armed robbery. That's a mandatory minimum of 10 sentence. 10 years. He was pled down to carjacking, released in 2021, and then he ends up allegedly murdering 2 women right after that. When the law enforcement officer was talking to me and telling me about it, I mean, you can almost like hear the anguish in his voice, the frustration in his voice. It's that kind of stuff right there that's got to stop. You want to build a good relationship with law enforcement, try some cases, get in there, stay in the fight for the victims and for law enforcement. That's how you do it.
All right, thank you. Ms. Wilson, I didn't see your hand. Are you wanting a 60-second rebuttal?
Yeah, sure. Carjacking is a violent crime. It's a very serious crime. Now, I'm not familiar with that defendant, and I don't know what kind of sentence he got from the judge, but that certainly is a conviction for carjacking is nothing to sneeze at. And again, I point to the hypocrisy of Mr. Osborne acting like he didn't plead down cases and doesn't plead down cases. 67% of his cases dismissed or pled down. I mean, it is a tool of prosecutors because there is a difference in the level of proof to make an arrest versus to get a conviction.
Thank you. Mr. Osborne, 60-second rebuttal, please.
Yeah. So, yeah, carjacking is a violent crime. But when you take the 10-year floor, the mandatory minimum of 10 years off the table, and you turn it down to 0, and you put a career violent offender, violent career criminal back out on the streets, and then he ends up murdering people, that's a problem. That's a problem. And yeah, you do have to plead down cases. And look, I mean, I plead cases. We always plead cases. But if you end up pleading a case and it ends up costing people their lives, you need to do an internal check. Where did we drop the ball on this? What happened on this? How did we evaluate this case? You can't always predict if somebody's going to commit a violent crime. I get it. But when you have a career criminal who has shown a propensity for problems and you give him a floor of 0, don't blame the judge for putting him back out on the street. Ultimately, it was the prosecutor's decision to take that floor of 10 off the table.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Osborne. We're going to start with the next question. It is to you, sir. The Ninth Circuit Solicitor oversees 2 offices in the circuit. How would you describe your management style?
All the good supervisors that I have worked for throughout the years share some similar qualities and traits. One of the things that I have seen that I love, and every good supervisor has always done this, is they try to create an environment that enables you to be the best prosecutor you can probably be, or best employee you can probably be. You have to trust your employees, and you have to encourage them. You have to give them the morale to stay in the fight, to do their job. I'm going to let y'all in on a little bit of insider trading that I don't think was a good example of trusting your employees or establishing morale. When you work in the Ninth Circuit, you have something that's called the EIO board. And I'm sure all the employees who are watching right now are kind of smiling. This was a way to track your employees to make sure that they're doing their job. Every 15 minutes, you had to wiggle a keyboard or a mouse or a keyboard, or you'd go idle. To me, that's kind of like, I don't know, it's sort of like lazy supervision. I mean, trust your employees to be doing their job. And look, under my leadership, the bottom line is I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to motivate you. I'm going to give you the tools to succeed. But we're talking about public safety. I'm not going to monitor you with an EIO board. We used to call it Skynet. That's what we used to laugh about it. I'm not going to monitor you like that. But look, if you're not doing your job, you're not going to have a job.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Ms. Wilson, the same question for you. The Ninth Circuit Solicitor oversees 2 offices. How would you describe your management style?
I would describe my style as hands-on and open door. I am present at work every day. My door is open, and I'm not sitting there monitoring some board. The reality is the board that he's talking about serves as a time clock for employees who aren't salaried. So instead of them coming in and punching a clock, like in some offices, they just log on. Nobody has been punished or chastised for going, quote, idle on their board. And he knows that. That's one of the most ridiculous things that I've heard. It's not for that purpose. I certainly trust my employees, which is why I'm moving along with the times and allowing people to work from home more, just like people in corporate America are. When we don't have court, when we aren't, when it's not necessary for us to be present in the courtroom, we're trusting our employees to do that. But the main thing is to have dialogue with the employees and especially the lawyers, to let them see how I analyze cases, what my expectations are, so that they can learn and they can know how to prepare a case. They can know when a case is viable, when it's not viable. And I have a leadership structure so that there are 2 levels of supervision and mentorship throughout the office.
All right, thank you. Mr. Osborne, you want a 60-second rebuttal, is that it?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Okay.
I have to point this out. So, no, there are consequences to going idle. There are. When I prosecuted and tried the horrific case, this kid was caught between 2 gang members that were shooting each other, ends up getting shot and paralyzed. The Skynet said that I logged in 120 hours in a 2-week period. But unfortunately, Skynet also reported that I left work when we got the verdict early on Friday and ended up getting docked 2 hours of annual leave. Not a big deal, but there are consequences to going idle. Next, a supervisor does need to be present. You know, in the 7 years that I was in the Ninth Circuit, there were only 3 times that I can count that I remember seeing my opponent in a courtroom. You got to get into a courtroom because some of the stuff that's going in there is not great. It's not keeping our community safe. And as a supervisor, if you get in there and you see what's going on, you can help encourage and help motivate and help correct problems that are happening.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Wilson, I didn't see your hand raised. Are you okay to move on or?
Yeah, we can move on.
Okay. All right, thank you. The next question goes to you, Ms. Wilson, and it says, what are your ideas for reducing the backlog of cases in the circuit and reducing the time it takes to resolve them?
First of all, it's important to understand that the backlog is complicated, and I can reduce the backlog with the stroke of a pen. But I think we all know that's not the way to reduce a backlog. The second thing is to understand how the backlog, the court's backlog, developed. As I mentioned, and as my opponent keeps misstating, the dockets were taken from the solicitors in around 2012. We didn't all have the same order, and he knows that. In 2017, an administrative order was issued for our circuit specifically. It was later amended. Over my objection, the whole thing, over the public defender's objection, we all knew that it was going to be a failure, and it was. And that's why we now have a new administrative order that the whole state is under that improves our situation. And what we are seeing is that since the new order came into fruition, we have reduced the backlog by more than most circuits in the state. And what this order does is take us back to another time when we experimented with an order like the one that is now in place. And I, along with the chief administrative judge, were recognized by the chief justice on the state house floor for the good work we were doing. So we can do it under this new order by prioritizing cases, by lifting the quotas that are on us now.
All right, thank you. Mr. Osborne, the question is for you. What are your ideas in reducing the backlog of cases in the circuit and reducing the time it takes to resolve them?
When we're talking about a backlog, there is a right way to reduce the backlog, and then there's a wrong. Right now, in an effort to reduce the backlog, my opponent came up with a new reason to dismiss cases called docket prioritization. And docket prioritization, just to be clear, the prosecutor isn't saying that they can't prosecute the case because there's no evidence. What they're saying is that I'm just a little busy right now and I'm going to prioritize other seemingly more important cases. Well, the problem with that is, one, you have officers who are out there putting their lives on the line, making arrests for individuals who have violated the law, and it can be proven. To say that you're too busy right now and you're going to dismiss those cases If there are certain charges that you're not going to prosecute anymore, let those cops know so they're not putting their lives on the line. So I'm telling you from experience, I know not everybody wants to go to jail. And there are going to be circumstances where you're actually fighting with individuals. So let everybody know that you're not prosecuting those cases anymore. Some of the charges that were dropped were serious charges. Possession with intent to distribute cocaine-based, third offense. Meth, third offense. These are 10 to 30-year offenses. That's the wrong way. The right way is when you make a plea offer, mean it. If they reject the plea offer and you can't prove the case, dismiss it, move on. Don't squeeze pleas. We see plea offer after plea offer after plea offer, 4 and 5 years. That's the wrong way to manage it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Osborne. We're ready to move on to the next question.
I don't think I got.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't see you raise your hand, but sure, certainly you may have 60 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. Docket prioritization is a tool that we use post-COVID. And if you look at dismissals across the state, we aren't any more or less above anybody else in the state when we had the crisis of the pandemic. What we did was we looked at low-level offenses and we said, okay, does that person have a more serious charge? If they have a more serious charge, we'll dismiss this lower level charge. Is there a problem with our going forward with it? Those are the things we looked at, and then we tracked it. And the reason we tracked it is so we could study it to see if it affected public safety. And what we saw is that it wasn't affecting public safety. And what's interesting about it is there's no difference in docket prioritization and prosecutorial discretion. And once again, my opponent doesn't have a problem with using prosecutorial discretion to dismiss a case, because he dismissed about the same percentage under his discretion, his prosecutorial discretion, as we did with docket prioritization.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Osborne, you have 60 seconds.
Not serious cases. Possession with intent to distribute, third offense, methamphetamine, is a 10 to 30-year offense, minimum 10 years, maximum 30-year offense. Possession with intent to distribute, third offense, meth, coke. That means these individuals have been convicted at least 2 other times. These are very serious offenses, especially whenever you consider the fentanyl crisis that's going out there right now. And not to challenge you on this, but you don't know the effect. 377 of those warrants out of the over 1,147 have been expunged. We don't know what those defendants are doing. We know they're back out on the streets, but we have no idea what they're doing. This is just not the right way to manage the docket. And I have never, ever dismissed a case because I was too busy.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. We'll start with you, sir, for the next question. On a related note, what would be your plan to account for the population growth in both Charleston and Berkeley counties and the resulting caseload increase?
Well, I would circle back to training. We can become a more efficient Ninth Circuit with the correct training and bringing consistency within the training. If you have individuals in the office who are trained up, who understand how to prosecute cases and evaluate cases, then we can move more efficiently through cases. And one thing that we can do to handle the influx, the flow of cases, is stop squeezing pleas. My opponent, when I started work at the Ninth Circuit, talked about, she had a 50% goal, a 50% conviction rate for all of the prosecutors in the office. Well, that kind of put red flags with me, because in law enforcement, that's what we would call a quota. And we learned that quotas are bad. Quotas cause good people to do bad things to try to reach a quota. And how do you do that in law enforcement or in prosecution? Use pretrial detention as leverage to squeeze a plea. Individuals will end up sitting in jail year after year, and then a prosecutor will just end up giving a plea deal that contemplates or gives the individual the freedom to walk out on a time served or a probationary plea. That's not fair. That's not right. That doesn't keep our communities safe. So one thing that we're going to do, and it'll make the office more efficient, and it will end up helping with the backlog and the growth issues, We're going to stop squeezing pleas, stop solicitor time. You can't prove the case, you got to dismiss it, you got to move on. The ones you can't prove, stay in the fight.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson, the same question. What would be your plan to account for the population growth in both Charleston and Berkeley counties and the resulting caseload increase?
One of the things that we're doing in Charleston County that we will extend to Berkeley County is screening cases. In other states across the country, the prosecutor is involved in the case early on and can weigh in on the case, the strength of the case. And what my opponent is talking about is weak cases. And so what we're doing is we have a team of senior prosecutors, 2 of them, who are looking at a subset of cases that we know are the most often dismissed for insufficient evidence. And we're taking those cases and looking at them sooner so that if they are weak, we identify that sooner and we can dismiss them and we can move along. Studies have shown that when cases are resolved more quickly, whether it's by plea or by dismissal or by trial and conviction, that it's better for recidivism rates for it to be handled quickly. And that the dismissal of a bad case is not going to have a negative impact on our community.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Osborne, your 60-second rebuttal.
I absolutely like the screening program. In fact, when Justice Initiative Lab came in and talked about the screening program, I suggested that to them. I think that's a good idea. What I don't like about the screening program, though, is the remanding of the cases. All right. So what, for the few lawyers who aren't listening, if an individual is charged with an offense and it goes to the general sessions level, the screener can then look at the case and say, you know what, I'd rather kick it back down to the municipal level. All right, the 30-day offense. Well, if the case is bad enough to where it needs to be kicked, maybe you need to dismiss it. But we also have transfer court within the Ninth Circuit. Don't clog up the magistrate level courts, and I assume in an effort to lighten the load, send it back to transfer court, handle it within the office. If it's bad enough to dismiss it. But if you can handle it in the office, just handle it within transfer court. Don't kick it back to the municipal. They're floundering, and it's not fair to them.
All right. Yes.
There's been sort of a mislabeling of screening and docket prioritization in this notion that we're too busy or don't have enough time. It's called prioritization because it's just that. If it is a lower level offense that can be handled adequately in municipal court, many times what we're seeing with the screeners is that half the cases are in municipal court and half of them are in general sessions court. And they're barely in general sessions court. And the reality is the municipal court can get to it faster and get a consequence with it faster instead of waiting and clogging up either transfer court in our level, which is only once every couple of months, versus handling in a municipal court and getting a result much quicker.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. We're going to start with you, Ms. Wilson, on the next question. How would you describe your relationship with public defenders and private criminal defense attorneys?
I think I have a really good relationship with both public defenders and the private bar. Mr. Osborne just mentioned that because the private bar has, or public defenders, defense attorneys have given me money, that they're corrupt. I don't see that at all. What I see is that they know that we have to work together and be more as efficient as possible. And the defense bar knows how adverse the environment has been due to the docket control issue that just was resolved. And what the defense bar is seeing and what defendants are seeing is that with this new order, we're trying more cases. Statewide, we're at the top of the list since the new order gave us control back. We're at the top of the list for trying cases. The statewide average for convictions, 70%. Our average, close to 85%, because my office is doing a great job and the defense bar knows it. They want an efficient system. They're tired of sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting on court to go and knowing that they're wasting time. And that's one of the reasons that they support me, because they know with this new order that we can get back on track like we were the last time that we obtained and received accolades for doing such a great time and doing such a great job. The former public defender, the current public defender, and I have a very positive relationship, and we need that to be efficient.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Osborne, how would you describe your relationship with public defenders and private criminal defense attorneys?
I will tell you a story. So I ended up working a case with a private attorney who I did not know. I've never dealt with him before. And he ended up asking around, getting a scouting report of what I was like. And so he ended up coming in and talking to me, and he said that he heard that I was a hard, you can imagine what comes after that, prosecutor. And I said, no, I don't think so. I mean, I'm fair. And then I had a conversation with Andy Savage, and I was joking with him, and I told him about that. And Andy looked at me, and if you know the way Andy could be, he looked at me and he kind of smiled with that little devilish grin that he's got. And he says, David, let me correct you. You are absolutely a hard prosecutor, but you're a fair one. And that's the reputation that I believe that I have. And just to correct a couple of things, I never said that receiving donations is corrupt. In fact, I mean, I was juxtaposing. I think the insinuation that my opponent tried to make is that somehow receiving a $2,000 donation will somehow compromise my integrity. Well, then the next question will be, well, what does $500,000 do to your integrity? I wasn't saying that receiving donations in and of itself is corrupt. Secondly, the conviction rate of 85% started in January. Go back to when COVID lockdowns in it and then see where it is.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Ms. Wilson, do you want a 60-second rebuttal, or can we move on?
The only rebuttal I would have is that I think the widespread support, the bipartisan support that I have from our defense bar shows that they know that I'm fair. And one of the things that I've done to ensure fairness and to be transparent for our community, for the defense bar, and even for our judges, is posting online what our guilty pleas or our convictions are for, if the charge was reduced, what the sentence we asked for was, and what the sentence that the judge gave was, so that everybody can understand what happened in court, whether it was us giving a deal or them giving a deal, or the judge giving a deal or a sweetheart sentence. Keeping everything fair, keeping it open, keeping it transparent. Nobody in the state's doing that, and very few in the country are doing that, but I'm doing it so that the community can have confidence in what goes on in our office.
Thank you. Mr. Osborne, 60 seconds for rebuttal.
Won't need it. The only thing that I will say to that is I do love the website. When you hear me quoting stats, I'm getting them from your own from the website, from the Ninth Circuit Solicitor's Office. So I do appreciate that.
All right. Thank you. All right, we'll go to the next question, which starts with you, Mr. Osborne. What is your description of the victim's Bill of Rights, and how would you incorporate that into your job?
So, I'll tell you another story, okay? Since I've been running, since this campaign started, I became friends with an individual, and I'm not going to mention her name because she has a pending case right now. But she called me up and she asked for my help. And so now we're talking about pending charges. There's a GS charge and an accompanying magistrate level charge. And I know what my opponent says, those can be handled efficiently, but there's a problem when you separate them. You're causing the victim to go through the anguish of coming into court twice. And she told me, A and B third was a magistrate level offense. Burglary first was a general session. She told me, she says, David, you're going to learn something by helping me out with this process. And I looked at her and I kind of smiled. I mean, I've tried murders. I don't know that I'm going to learn anything from A and B third. Of course, I didn't say that to her. She's so sweet. And I said, okay. But you know what? She was so right. I learned something. We went in there for that magistrate, for that assault and battery third magistrate level offense, and I watched her just go through this anguish, and she's going to have to do it again with a general sessions level. We're going to combine those cases. When there's a general sessions level, the statute allows us to do it. We're taking both of them. To answer your question, the Victim Bill of Rights, keep the victims advised, let them know what's going on with the case. And when I win this election, you're not going to have to come find me. If somebody kills someone in your family, I'm going to find you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Ms. Wilson, what is your description of the Victim's Bill of Rights, and how do you incorporate that into your job?
I incorporate it by being hands-on with victims, and I tell you, it is one of the most rewarding aspects of our job. And whether or not we had a piece of paper or a statute that required us to let victims know what's going on in a case, I think it's important in our duty, just as prosecutors, just as human beings, to share with victims what our plans are with a case. Now, sometimes, you know, victims don't agree with what we're doing, and they don't understand the rules of evidence or what the issues are with the case. And it's our job as prosecutors to keep them informed and to do our best to explain what the law is. Just this week, I had to sit down with 2 sets of victims and talk with them about their loved one being shot multiple times. And I had to explain to them, stand your ground, which is really, really tough for people, because it provides in South Carolina that if someone forces their way into a home or into a car or into a business, that the person who is being burglarized or what have you can unload on them, whether or not they had a means to get safe or you name it. And that was hard for people to understand when their loved one had been shot so many times. But it was my job, my duty, to let them know and to help them understand why that's the law and how it fit in with their case.
All right. Thank you very much. Can we move on to the next question? Okay. All right. We'll start with you, Ms. Wilson. What is your proudest career accomplishment and why?
Well, I have a number of cases that I tried that are personal accomplishments and that make me feel good. I've had 2 rape cases that were especially difficult. One went to trial and we obtained a conviction, and it was a older woman who was asleep in her bed, and someone broke in, and CPD used some new DNA technology to help us track the person down, and he wanted a trial and we gave him one, and we got a conviction on that. The other was a woman in Folly Beach who was followed home by a strange man who broke in and brutally attacked and raped her, and she fought like crazy, and she's a survivor. I would have loved to have tried that case, but we were able to work out a plea, and the guy got over 60 years for that, and that was quite rewarding. But probably the biggest accomplishments have been my efforts for bond reform, because those are things that are going to have an effect on public safety across the state and across our community, to keep repeat violent offenders locked up until their trial time. That has been a major accomplishment. And then my work on officer-involved shootings and critical incidents, establishing a policy and a protocol that the whole community can know and can understand is good for the community, good for people who are killed or injured, to know what the process, their families to know what the process is going to be. And it's good for law enforcement to have a regimen, because before that policy was enacted, it was taken months and months and months, if not years, for a decision to be made about prosecution because of the delays in the investigation and the reporting. So those 2 things are going to have major effects on justice in the Ninth Circuit.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Osborne, what is your proudest career accomplishment and why?
The Holly Hill murders. And for those of you who don't know, this was a horrific case. you had multiple individuals that did a home invasion in Holly Hill. As they did the home invasion, they came across two adults. They executed both with headshots. As they made their way through the home, they came across a barricaded door in the back of the home. On the other side of that door, there were three children who were holding each other. These individuals broke in the door, and as they got inside, they shot each one in the head. The little boy, his name was Dreams. Dreams would fight for his life that night, going all the way into the next morning. When police arrived, he was still alive, and they helicoptered him out, and Dreams survived. And truly one of the bravest things that I've ever seen was that young boy testifying at that trial and ended up identifying the man that pointed the old-timey revolver at him, and then everything went black. It was a long trial. It was probably the biggest case in the history of the First Circuit. It was about a 3-week trial. I was extremely proud of the work that we did in putting that together. That case went through the hands of almost every solicitor in the office, including the solicitor. And when I got there, we took it to trial with the help of the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office, Captain Shumpert and his group. Fantastic job.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Are we ready to move on to the next question?
Sure.
Okay, great. It starts with you, Mr. Osborne. How would you educate Gen Z voters who are aged 18 to 24 about your race and perhaps even down ballot races?
That's a good one. Yeah, my daughter. So love my daughter. She does nonprofit work now in DC, and I love my son. He is a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. And when you talk about educating Gen Zers, I can't think of two individuals who have more polarizing political opinions. Okay, but I love them both. Great people. I think, I think I would encourage Gen Zers like I would encourage everyone. Get involved, educate yourself. See the differences. I mean, we're two very different candidates with two very different philosophies on prosecution, and educate yourself on that. And in particular, I mean, there's a lot of important issues coming up in this election. And I would tell people it's important to pay attention to the presidential election. I get it. That's important. But the down ballot positions are the ones that really affect your daily life and your quality of life. So I would just encourage everyone, get involved, vote, and educate yourself. And I don't know that I would treat them any differently.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Ms. Wilson, how would you educate Gen Z voters who are ages 18 to 24 about your race and perhaps other down ballot races?
We have to meet them where they are. We have to go to where they are, whether that's social media, the college campuses, you name it. They are not going to be watching television. They're going to be watching their phones, and we've got to get into their phones so that they understand, there's so much attention on the national races, but the races that affect the day-to-day lives of the people in this community are the down ballot races like mine. And to reach those people, we got to do it through social media. We got to get into their phones. And when I say get into their phones, I don't mean like tapping their phones. I mean just getting the message either via text, via Instagram, via Facebook. They're only on Facebook because their grandparents are on Facebook, but that is one way. I have not gone to TikTok. I do think that is where many of them are, but I've got some big issues with TikTok and what happens with data mining there. So I don't know that I'm going to go there, but certainly I think we've got to get on campuses, and we need to start early. We need to start in high schools, and that's why I welcome any opportunities to speak in high schools and grammar schools, middle schools, you name it, and do that quite often so that they can be more familiar about what a DA or a solicitor does, and it's not a mystery to them.
All right. Thank you, both of y'all. Are we ready to move on? Okay, this is the final question, and it goes to you, Ms. Wilson. What measures have you already taken, or what future ideas do you have for ensuring racial equity in cases brought to the solicitor's office?
Well, this has been a major part of the work I've been doing with the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and with my office in general. This is the issue of our time. And unfortunately, my opponent has failed when it comes to this issue. I think we have to show the community that we have compassion and that we have understanding about what our history has been. We aren't going to decline to prosecute a whole class of cases. We aren't going to make it a free-for-all. But we have to understand how race has impacted the justice system. And for my opponent to say that in his 25 years, he has never seen race inequities in the justice system, only inequities as to wealth, is just outrageous and absurd. He cut his teeth in New Orleans. We've all read the stories about New Orleans. For him to be handling the riot cases from Charleston and to flippantly say that race hasn't had an impact on the justice system is unacceptable. I've done all sorts of training through the YWCA and the Race Equity Institute, through the Justice Innovation Lab, through Ethical Coach, to help my folks understand our past so that we won't repeat those same mistakes. The more we know, the better we'll do.
All right.
When you know better, you do better.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Osborne, the same question. What measures have you already taken, or what future ideas do you have for ensuring racial equity in cases brought to the solicitor's office?
I'm not giving lip service. I'm talking about real change, a real change within the criminal justice system. We're doing away with quotas. That's going to really make a difference. If you can't prove the case, dismiss it, move on. That's going to make a big difference. Stop using pretrial detention as leverage for pleas. That's going to make a big difference. Justice Initiative Lab came in about 3 to 4 years ago and did a race audit study in the Ninth Circuit and found that it takes the Ninth Circuit 6 weeks longer to dismiss a black male defendant's case who is similarly situated to a white male defendant. Jill came up with suggestions to remedy that disparity, and we have heard nothing in 3.5 to 4 years to fix that problem. Nothing. Second, get out and engage with the community. I have been developing relationships for over 25 years with community members, countless number of pastors, NAACP at Goose Creek, NAN, Cajun, church leaders, speaking at churches, getting to know people. When there's a critical incident and there is a problem, you better have already developed that trust. And listen, I am not locking anybody out of my office. If you want to come and talk to me, you're not going to have to wait in the lobby. You can come into my office. I'm going to have those tough conversations with everyone.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Ms. Wilson, is there?
Yes, I need to respond to that.
Okay. 60 seconds, please.
Quotas don't exist in my office, and he knows that. If a case is weak, we dismissed it. We have quick moving jail cases. We have 2 people set up, one in the public defender's office, one in my office. We get notification if somebody is in jail and the case is ready to be moved. We do all that we can to get it on a docket. One of the problems has been that our docket has limited us to 15 cases per session. That's not enough. One of the things that we've done, and he said we haven't heard a word since that study, he doesn't know what he's talking about. The whole screening process was set up so that we could identify cases quicker that were weak and that needed to be dismissed, because most of those cases in the long run were cases against Black people. So we aren't just screening Black people's cases. But the cases that we are screening, because so many more Black people are charged with them, they're getting eliminated faster. And that is having a positive impact on the community.
All right, thank you. Mr. Osborne, 60 seconds.
When you tell your office that you want a 50% conviction rate, that is a quota. That is a quota. And then we've seen how that works. That is not a good thing. Do justice, don't do quotas. Screening, when I was talking about, no, I'm not talking about screening cases. What I'm talking about is the 6-week disparity, why it takes the office 6 weeks longer to dismiss a black male's case compared to a white male's case. In the article that I read this morning, my opponent said it was the police's fault. I mean, literally, it was law enforcement's fault. I'm not saying there's not a good reason for it. What I'm saying is we haven't heard what that reason is. And what I'm saying is we haven't seen any of the Jill suggestions implemented. And if they have been implemented, why haven't we heard about that? What does the new numbers show? Has that been corrected? We're going to run those numbers. We're going to correct that when I win this election.
All right, thank you.
Response to that?
Well, you've had your rebuttal. So what we will start with now is a closing statement, and you can use your 60 seconds as you choose, Ms. Wilson. We'll start with you.
Okay. So I can rebut that last comment.
Well, you can choose your closing statement, however it is that you prefer to use that 60 seconds.
Well, I do want to thank the league again, and for all who were here to watch. I need to remind you that my opponent was trusted with one of the most important cases that we've seen, and that was the riot cases. And he let his ego blow it. He fumbled in spectacular fashion, and it could have been disastrous for our community. He made comments that were absurd and offensive in his handling of that case, and we had to clean it up. I've been trusted, I've been tested, I've been tough, and I've been true to you. I've been the most transparent solicitor that this state has ever seen. And while I've been out fighting tooth and nail for bond reform or for judicial reform, my opponent has joined forces with those fighting against it. His top supporters have fought against us, and he's not speaking out against it. He's joined forces with the poster child for judicial reform, and he's joined forces with those who abuse the system. It's critical for the chief prosecutor who prosecutes those who have committed crimes to know how to manage cases, to know how to evaluate cases, to decide whether a case is worthy of prosecution,
Thank you, Ms.
whether
Wilson.
the person needs to be rehabilitated.
All right.
Proud of the bipartisan support that I have.
Ms. Wilson, your time is up. I'm sorry. But thank you. Thank you. Mr. Osborne, you have 60-second closing remarks.
In this election, you definitely have two very different candidates. My opponent is a 16-year career politician. And yeah, she did take those cases from me, and I would encourage you to read what I said. Ultimately, I said I'm going to treat everyone equally and consistently, regardless of the color of their skin or the size of their wallet. And that was offensive to her. That's your politician, and then you have me. In law enforcement, we learned and we were trained that when you're doing an active shooter, an active school shooter situation, you're going to get shot. But you have to stay in the fight for kids. In this election, I'm the candidate who's going to stay in the fight. Like other law enforcement officers, I have put my life on the line, and I have patrolled some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in our country. I'm a little older now. The duty belt's going to be too heavy for me, but I can put on a coat and tie, and I can fight for you in a courtroom. I'd be honored to have your vote. David Osborne for Ninth Circuit Solicitor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to both of you. We appreciate your participation. And we want to also thank the audience for taking the time to hear from our candidates. We encourage everyone to study the issues carefully, learn about more positions of each candidate, and vote for the candidate of your choice on November 5th. Early voting starts October 21st. Please check your voter registration status and polling places at scvotes.gov. And again, candidate information and answers to questions for all races can be found on the League of Women Voters vote411.org website. Thank you to both of our candidates and to the audience for joining us tonight and for your thoughtful answers. Hope everyone has a good evening. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.